continue on from the last video regarding rebuilding the intermediate gear cluster for the MaxiDrive 30% or 49% low range gear sets for the LT230 transfer case. I have installed the gear set with the original bearings and predetermined spacer in the transfer case. I've checked the resistance to turn over the input gear with obviously all the gears engaged. I've recorded that amount. I've then removed the gear set back out. I've checked again, double checked the resistance to turn the input gear by itself. Now the intermediate gear set's out, which gives me a difference between the two, so I can have a bit of a starting point to know what the preload was on this gear set before I go and change out the bearings and put the new bearings in. So now I'm at the point where, okay, I'm ready to strip out all the bearings. So I've given this a really good clean, final clean with acetone, because the first thing I'm going to do is put some weld inside this tapered roller bearing cup. Hopefully that'll shrink it in and it'll just fall out. That's the first bearing I'm going to attempt to remove. Then we'll go on to removing the internal tapered roller bearing that's in between the external tapered roller and the other external needle roller. So that's my first point of call there. I'm just going to TIG weld this. TIG's what I've got and what you can use MIG and everything. The only thing with MIG is you'd want to give this a good spray down with some anti-spatter. You wouldn't want any spatter sticking to these teeth of the gear set and having to try and deal with that. So I'm just going to throw a bit of weld in here. We'll see how that goes. Hopefully it works, and that cup drops out, and that's stage one done. So we'll get into that and we'll see if we can achieve a bit of luck and go from there. Obviously that'll need to cool a little bit, and we'll see if that wants to come out. probably not enough weld yet, so I'd rather do it in small pieces rather than just get into it too much and put too much heat into the gear. So we'll give it a bit more and see how that goes. There we go. Good thing is we didn't go through the back of the cup and form sugaring or oxidisation, which could have affected the inside bore here. It's shrunk it out enough. That's just popped out nicely. So a little bit at a time. We don't want to put too much heat into this gear set. I can't leave my hand on there too long, but I can touch it so I'm not burning skin. So that shouldn't have affected the integrity of the gear set whatsoever. So the next thing will be to do to remove the circlip that cup, the tapered roller bearing cup, was seated into, and then the next cup, the circlip that's in front of it, so it can come out this way as well. One. This one's a bit tight, I'd say, because when we've done the nut up on the intermediate shaft and we pulled those two bearings tight to each other with the selective sleeve, it's pulled that inner bearing towards the circlip nice and snug. So I'm just going to get a timber drift and try and drift it down a little bit, or brass drift there, just away from the circlip so I can get that circlip out. Just a long punch is what I'll use here, just to try and get that bearing down a little bit. There we go, second circlet. A bit dirty in there. I'll see if I can wipe it. So hopefully you can see there's the second bearing. So we've removed this cup here, and I can, touch it now. That's probably 40, 50 degrees or something like that. It's not that hot at all that it's going to be an issue. There's no bluing or anything on the gear set itself. So this is our second internal tapered roller bearing, and this is the one we really need to get out, so then we can drift out the needle roller bearing that's on that side, and we're away then to get new bearings and install them. So because of the welding, the whole gear set has heated up, and I can feel heat in this internal tapered roller bearing here. So I'm going to have to let that cool right down so I can apply the heat to the outside of this gear set. So then hopefully that heats up first through the core, starts to expand and lets this tapered roller bearing come out. And what I'm going to do is get a drift of some sort to have sitting or ready to go, so as I'm heating it I can actually try and drift it out a little bit just by tapping what essentially is this side of the tapered roller bearing, this part of the race here, hopefully with a bit of expansion and whatnot, that'll go down. I mean, I'll even give it a go now just to see if there's any sort of luck with the warmth that's in this, because that would be really good if that's the case. But I doubt that it's going to move enough or move freely enough with all the warmth that's sunk. It's heat sinked into the bearing itself. Well, we're definitely moving that. It's come past the first circlip groove, so this might actually be a win because it's not taking much pressure. Quite close now, maybe 5 mil to the surface, and then the depth of the cup. So approximately another 25 mil, the bearing will be out. Still a good bit of warmth in that, but again, I'm handling this with a bare hand, so it's not ridiculously hot. The bearing itself is almost as hot as the gear set, so there's probably not a lot of relief in that at the moment. Awesome. Tapered roller bearing, cup and race. Obviously still a bit dirty. So we have the internal bore, 2 circlip grooves. So that internal cup just gets installed that way, so taper that way of the cup itself, internal all the way down. There's a bit of a shoulder there. As we noted, there was a little bit of room to push it back when it was drawn against the circlip. So when we install it, it will be pulling that bearing up against the circlip, that last little bit. Obviously, when you're installing it yourself, if you progressively putting it in, you can keep an eye on it, and you just want to drift it in or press it in just past the circlip so you can get the circlip in. The less distance it's got to come back, the more likely it is just to come back and seat whilst torquing up the intermediate shaft and nut. So the next thing to do now will be to try and remove the needle roller bearing, and I'm not sure if I've got anything of an appropriate size at the moment. We'll have a look at that. Again, just a normal internal circlip here. Remove that. Yep, that's not a slip fit. We'll see if we can remove this circlip from down in here. There's another one that it's seated against. Move that one. So now we need something to drift that. So the bore's about 42 millimeters. I'll see if I can set something up to drift that out. I'll need to support the gear set here so the bearing can come out. Alternatively, we could possibly drift it out this way using this as its own support. That's assuming that the bore has been machined right through. It's only got to come another 5 mil and then it drops into this bore, so obviously the length of itself and 5 mil, which is essentially no different lengthwise whether we go this way or this way. It's just whether or not this bore has been machined past the circlip. I would assume it has been, when they're boring it out, but we'll see what we can achieve. I'll come back to you. Back again. Did you miss me? No, crickets. Found a drifting tool, just one of my press tools that I made for suspension bushes. Happens to be a good fit in there. It's only a couple of mil smaller than the bore of the pinion gear, the low pinion gear, and but big enough to press against the main body of the needle roller, so we're gonna be able to drift that out. Now I have given it a tap with a dead blow. It has started to move, but what I'd like to try is heating this up with the heat gun, applying a bit of heat, seeing if that makes it easier. I don't think it's going to drop away, given the small mass in the pinion gear here. I think it's going to transfer the heat straight into that bearing, but it may relieve it, it may make it a bit easier. Potentially this is something you could try yourself for the very first tapered roller bearing you're going to pull out, the one that I welded up there. Obviously support the gear set up, a little bit higher than that off something, and just focus the heat into the body. Try not to get the heat down on the inside or get it blowing up on the inside, because you don't want to heat that bearing cup and the bore. That's the last thing that wants to heat. So the gear set is expanding outwards, but the bore, pulling that bore outwards, but not expanding that as well, the bearings as well. So maybe this is something that'll work quite easily without welding, and the less of those sorts of things you can do, and the less belting it, absolute positive. So we'll give this a little go, and we'll see what happens and see if it makes any sort of improvement. There are some oil lubrication holes through the gear set. I will try and stay away from blowing heat into those. One right there. There's one on the opposite side. Bearing's getting pretty hot, so the heat is wicking through that pretty quickly, so I don't know how much of an advantage that is. I don't think there's much point getting it much hotter. It's about 47. We'll see how easy that is to tap, if it's made it any easier for me. Going out relatively easily. There we go. That's our needle roller bearing. And thankfully, I can still see the markings on here, and the numbers, so I can take this to a bearing shop and get another one. Now, I don't know, given there's been some changes from this prototype gear set, the original prototype gear set, to the current day ones, I won't even bother telling you guys this bearing number because it might not be the same. They may have changed some stuff, because I know that in the new gear sets, between the needle roller bearing and the tapered roller bearing that's in the middle, there is now a oil slinger that gets sandwiched. So that would be on the shaft like that. On the intermediate shaft, you'd have the roller bearing up, needle roller bearing up that end, have the taper roller bearing, the internal or middle bearing there, with the cups obviously in the gear set, spacer, taper roller bearing. Now, in my particular gear set here, this prototype one, that taper roller bearing is seated all the way against the shoulder. The shoulder, everything is clamped through here. On the new gear sets, there's an oil slinger that sits here and gets clamped to that. So whilst the gears are rotating and the oil is coming through the gear set, it's not actually spinning, but it's acting like a spinner because the gear's spinning around it. So it's to spread the oil around and lubricate it. So I'm not sure if they've changed this at all, this bearing. So again, I don't think it's pertinent telling you guys the bearing number off it. You know, if you're changing these, you're going to get this apart. And if you haven't got any of the indications here, you should be able to take that bearing to a bearing shop and they should be able to measure it and get you one exactly the same. It's not going to be a proprietary or a foreign or a hard to get bearing. MaxiDrive is certainly not known for doing that. They're certainly, you know, known for making things obtainable and, you know, common sense. So we've got the bearings apart. That's a good win. I can sort out these taper roller bearings and you know, get all this cleaned up really nicely. Clean up the surd clips. You know, if I'm happy with them, which I don't see why they don't look damaged or twisted or anything. They're in good nick. I can install the new bearings and we can send it on its way and, you know, check that preload when we reinstall it and make sure it's all roses. And, you know, I'll do a bit of video of that, you know, and see if we do have to make any adjustments to the predetermined spacer that's been supplied by MaxiDrive when they've originally set up the preload on this modified intermediate gear cluster. So maybe that's a bit of a help to you guys. At least you can see what's going on. And yeah, good on you. Cheers.